very Merry Christmas to you. This is my Christmas video. Bit of a strange one this year, just a completely random topic, which probably only quite a small number of people will be interested in, but I just felt in a bit of a perverse mood as far as Christmas was concerned. I've got the decorations, I've got the light bulbs on, so that's my concession to Christmas. So my Christmas topic this year is the songs of Colin Moulding from XTC. I'm going to do a kind of rough top 10 of my favourites. So just a quick word about XTC, a great British new wave band from Swindon from the late 1970s, whose career extended into the 80s, into the 90s, and sort of came to an end in roughly kind of the year 2000. The band had originally had four members, Andy Partridge, Colin Moulding, Dave Gregory and the drummer Terry Chambers. Terry left 3 albums into their career. The band became a 3-piece. Eventually Dave left and it got down to the 2 founding members, Andy Partridge and Colin Moulding. And there was a kind of curious situation in XTC in that Andy Partridge, really, he was the control freak of the band. He wrote most of the band's songs and he seemed to hold the reins. Colin, the bass player, wrote far fewer songs overall. He was kind of the George Harrison of the band. You'd have a situation where, you know, for every album, Andy would have most of the songs and Colin would have maybe 2 songs or 3. Occasionally he would have more. But overall, if you were to say, you know, who was the dominant songwriter in XTC, it would definitely have been Andy Partridge, with Colin bringing up the rear. Reading between the lines, you know, reading books about XTC, Andy Partridge, definitely a control freak, someone who liked to have his own way. He was also an incredibly strong and distinctive songwriter with a very, very strong idiosyncratic style, rooted in British psychedelia, but mixed up with much more avant-garde things, you know, things like Captain Beefheart. He was a big fan of Trout Mass Replica, Andy Partridge was. And, you know, often his songs can be very challenging. Andy's written some fantastic songs. You know, if I was to compile a list of my favourite XTC songs ever, there would be so many Andy Partridge songs in there. Just want to make that absolutely clear. You know, songs like Earn Enough for Us, Senses Working Overtime, This World Over, The Mayor of Simpleton, so many great tracks. Having said that, there are some Andy Partridge tracks which are hard work. You know, often I think he would probably invent chords on the guitar. You know, he would bang his guitar into strange made-up tunings, possibly. He would certainly play chords and make up chord sequences that were very unconventional and sometimes quite difficult to listen to. There are certain Andy Partridge songs which don't particularly move me at all. They sound a little bit like exercises in, you know, kind of almost being deliberately, you know, musically perverse. Whereas Colin Moulding is generally more conventional, you know, less concerned with strange avant-garde chord progressions, far less Beefheartian, more rooted in classic British songwriting, the kind that you'd find, you know, from the Beatles onwards. Colin's songs sort of remind me of Squeeze, really. They have a much more gentle, melodic side to them. They're very quirky songs. And what I love about Colin's songs is that there is a very fine line of self-deprecation coming through in those songs. You know, Colin is a classic English underdog. He was sort of happy to play that role in XTC, although famously it did lead to certain eruptions, you know, like during the making of Skylarking, which was produced by Todd Rundgren. Colin stormed out of the studio one day, you know, when he and Andy just couldn't agree on how a particular bass part was to go. So Colin wouldn't let himself be trampled on, but he definitely did allow Andy to be the top dog, I think. And what comes through in Colin's songs often is this very kind of wry, self-deprecating thing. There's a fantastic song which I'm not going to talk about, One in a Million, you know, where he just sings about the fact that, he sings, I never seem to do anything. And you know, he seems very content to be not in Andy's shadow exactly, but to be bringing up the rear in a very English way. And you can kind of imagine him sitting in the studio having a cup of tea, you know, while Andy is concocting these crazy songs. Anyway, I'm going to do my top 10 roughly. It's not, you know, exact. I mean, there are, you know, these songs can kind of, you know, move about. Just one more thing to say before I do is that interestingly, it was often Colin who came up with the, you know, the hits. XTC didn't have many hits, but when they did, it was more often than not, you know, it could be Colin who would just produce this kind of wonderful, sparkling, melodic song, which would kind of trump Andy's attempts, because Andy wasn't commercial. He didn't have much of a commercial head on him. He did write commercial songs, but Colin seemed to do it much more instinctively. And you know, XTC's first hit single, you know, was by Colin, and I think it almost made the record label think, oh, you know, perhaps this guy is going to be the main, guy in XTC, and that rubbed Andy up the wrong way, you know. And I think Andy did definitely exert control over XTC as time went on, and Colin never became an equal partnership as far as, you know, how many songs were on the albums. Anyway, I thought it would be fun to do a top 10 of Colin Moulding, so let's do that now and start with number 10. That is the way that it's done. Boy and girl, girl and boy, this is how you do it. I don't mind the reason why. Okay, so coming in at number 10, we have the song That Is the Way from Drums and Wires. This is a fun track with a kind of call and response section. There's an infectious chorus, some nimble trumpet playing. It's got this gorgeous shimmering keyboard and guitar brass theme that keeps coming back. Now, the lyrics to this song, apparently, according to Colin in this book, it's kind of him reminiscing about how he was brought up. Colin himself became a parent very young, and he had a very strong memory of things his parents used to say to him when he was growing up that he then wanted to avoid saying to his children. So the song is built around these parental phrases: go and speak, do this to your niece, do that, kiss your aunt, do this on the cheek, do that, don't talk back, do this, now run along, do that, it's gone 8, do this, say goodnight, do that. That's the way it's done. So already you can hear that thing, you know, Colin's kind of self-deprecatory thing. He's quite happy to reveal that, you know, his upbringing involved him being bossed around, and he manages to make a really nice, fun track just out of that really simple idea, you know, things that your parents say to you when they're constantly ordering you around. Bungalow, silver shoreline. Number 9, we have the song Bungalow from Nonsuch, which contains Wurlitzer organ and a nostalgic, kind of happy, sad atmosphere, which Colin was great at evoking that. It's very English sounding. You know, Colin was, in a way, he was perhaps not up there with Ray Davies, but he was certainly from that same school of kind of English, wry, ironic songwriting. There's a church choir style backing vocal section in this, which is, you know, really, really English. And the song contains incredibly pictorial lyrics, and this is something which Colin does so well. It's almost like the Imagist school of poetry. I'm thinking of there's a poet, William Carlos Williams, who wrote a very famous short poem called The Red Wheelbarrow, which just literally contains the words, so much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. And this poem just caused a sensation in the poetry world because it was so stark and it just contained this really kind of, you know, solid image. And if you look at the lyrics for the song Bungalow and a lot of the songs Colin wrote, they seem cut from the same cloth. Bungalow by the sea, climbing rose, luxury accommodation traps the sun. Recording summed up everything about the glorious awfulness of a British seaside holiday. The organ was typical of the clubhouse cabaret organ in British holiday camps. The clarinet sound was pure acabilk and strangers on the shore, says Colin. Colin said it was the only song that he's ever written on piano apart from Wash Away. And he says it was really my parents' dream to save all their lives and retire to a seaside bungalow. Of course, they never did.
All content to let us wallow in a bit of nonsense. We're all so frivolous tonight.
Okay, at number 8 we have the song Frivolous Tonight, which comes from the Apple Venus album. Very British musical, Kinks in style, with a slightly detuned piano, touches of brass and feathery Beach Boys harmonies. Great lyrics. He says, girls in slacks talking about husbands with hairy backs. Again, it's that, self-deprecatory thing, and it's very prosaic. It's almost, it's very English picture postcard. In the book it says, imagine Colin Moulding, Ray Davies, Noel Coward and Cole Porter meeting at a suburban wine and cheese party and writing a sing-along song while the wives gossip about their husbands' hairy backs. And Colin says, it's probably the best thing I've ever written. It's more lyrically and musically complete. It's in the mood of Noel Coward's I've Been to a Marvellous Party. Ray Davies is certainly one of the best pop songwriters of the century, Colin said. His songs transcend the ages, and I think that's very much true of Colin's best work as well. At number 7 we have the song In Another Life, which comes from the Wasp Star album. He says it's definitely about me and Carol, that's his wife, but the images, he writes in this song about Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. He says, the Burton and Taylor images are icons of my mum and dad's generation. It's a little disguise, really. You can't let the cat out of the bag too much. This is a lovely song musically. It has quirky harmonica. There's a very sprightly rhythm that runs through it. There's a sparkling guitar, an absolutely irresistible melody, and there are some really funny lyrics. He sings, there might be flying pigs, and you'd give up the cigs, and beer tastes good in tins, test matches we might win, and your mother buys her gin. I was saying before, Colin's songs are a little bit like Chris Difford from Squeeze in the way that he will use just very mundane kind of objects and things from everyday life. His songs have that very prosaic quality, which is also full of pathos. At number 6, we have the song Runaways from the English Settlement album, the album that started to help XTC make serious inroads into the American market. It was the album they made just before they gave up touring, but that's another story. This is a hugely atmospheric song. It's got this great rolling feel to it with a vibey drum track, heavily flanged guitar, a very lonely sounding piano part. You sort of imagine when you hear this song, you imagine misty riders, galloping over the English countryside. But the lyrics turn out to be about domestic abuse, Daddy hit you in a temper, but he's sorry now. And it's not often, but this is occasionally true of Colin Moulding's songs, that musically it creates one particular sound or set of images, but if you listen to the lyrics, it often has a harder edge than you might expect.
Everyone's waking up to the new kingpin, trying to get way up with a smile.
We have the song King for a Day from the Oranges and Lemons album. This is a widescreen slice of 80s pop with flashes of psychedelia via Dave Gregory's kind of arsenal of effects pedals. It sounds a little bit like Tears for Fears, this one, until you listen to the lyrics, and then again, like I was saying before, it has a quite a political lyric. He's talking really about the 1980s and Thatcherism, really, and how things to do with value started to be understood purely in monetary terms, economic terms, and it's quite a biting song, but you sort of miss that. If you listen to the music, it kind of sweeps you away. It's like a kind of feel-good song. And it took me a long time to key into the lyrics of this track and realise that there was a kind of hard centre. You've got this very fluffy musical thing going on with this kind of hard centre in the middle. At number 4, we have the song I Remember the Sun, which is from the Big Express. And this song has a very kind of rolling jazz-like feel. It's a bit almost like a kind of John Coltrane piece, kind of, McCoy Tyner big piano chords. I think often, the arrangements in XTC were partly as a result of having Dave Gregory in the band, because he was sort of their resident genius in a way, and it features this guitar riff which is very convoluted. It sounds a bit like Robert Fripp. XTC always appealed to a certain contingent of jazzers and proggers, even though they were just a kind of edgy new wave pop band, but they kind of had influences there. There's a really great little story attached to how this song came to be written. From the book again, Chrissy Orrell was a bit of a bully around Pen Hill. And it says here, Pen Hill being the place where Colin grew up. He was the big kid. He ruled the Pen Hill dumps. The dumps were muddy escarpments at the edge of the estate, and there Colin and his mates would dig the great trench of Pen Hill. Years on, 2 sunny chords and that memory kindled this light, jazzy piece. And Colin remembers, that piece of wasteland was immensely evocative in my imagination. My mum hated me getting wet, so I remember the sun because I was only allowed out when it was sunny. The sun was king. And again, in that kind of imagist style, there are some really nice, vivid, pictorial lyrics in this song. Hot as golden sand, in fields we wiled away the hours. And then this great image, tarmac on the road is soft, chaff burns in a smoke wall. Really, what Colin was great at doing was conjuring up his childhood. And I think it's true to say that his songs often evoke that feeling of innocence in childhood. And that kind of, I suppose that plugs him back into the tradition of, people like Syd Barrett and these British songwriters, English songwriters, who were able to evoke something of the innocence of childhood, which is always, it's kind of always shot through with a bit of wistfulness and not kind of hankering back to the past, but certainly always reflecting on the past in a very slightly misty-eyed way.
A different kind of tinsel decorates my tree. Yeah, my bird performs.
At number 3, we have the song My Bird Performs from the Nonsuch album. When I was researching this video, I went onto Amazon to have a quick look to see what people said about the various albums, and I came up with a quote that somebody had written for this song, which I thought absolutely summed it up. Stunning, unique, magical. This song definitely has a very magical quality to it. It's quite a simple song in a way, and again it kind of evokes that feeling of childhood innocence. It's shot through with these very subtle bird effects, not just literally bird sound effects, but there's also this really delicate keyboard part that kind of runs through it, which imitates the sound of birds. There's a lovely trumpet part played by the trumpet player Guy Barker, who was very big at the time. He worked with Paul McCartney and so on. He was a kind of all-star trumpet player, and he contributes some really lovely work to this song. Some lovely, brass parts and some solo trumpet as well. Now, according to Colin, this song had quite a simple idea behind it. He just said the song was a metaphor for feeling good about life. And then he said, I hadn't got very fond memories of my 30s, and naivety got me through my 20s, but as I came closer to my 40s, it all started to come clear. Eventually the passions of youth and all that kind of broiling turmoil that can often go on, finally burns itself out, and perhaps you finally realise that you're where you were always meant to be, hopefully, unless your life has gone completely off the rails, and a feeling of peace descends, if you're lucky. And that's what this song certainly evokes. A feeling of peace, a feeling of, of there being a soul which is uncaged.
Laying on the grass, my heart it flares like fire. The way you slap my face.
At number 2, we have the fantastic song Grass from the Skylarking album. A slice of irresistible, woozy English psychedelia. It has an absolutely beautiful melody with it's got this guitar and violin very tightly interwoven, which apparently the influence for that was the John Lennon song How Do You Sleep. but it also conjures up everything that's kind of English pastoral. You know, think Nick Drake. It has that. Well, I mean, Nick Drake is very autumnal, I suppose, whereas this song and most of the rest of Skylarking, to me anyway, it conjures up summer. That feeling of, you know, a kind of hot summer's day when you're outside. Again, the childhood thing comes in, or at least early adulthood. A feeling of freedom and space and, you know, blue skies and just tall green grass. And of course the song is about, you know, nefarious goings on in the grass, you know, people up to no good, you know, young people getting together and fraternising and so on. It's got a kind of Blur-like quality, you know, Blur, the band. In fact, Colin's voice is uncannily like Damon Albarn's was later to be. You know, I mean, Damon Albarn no doubt had XTC in his mind when he came to record some of those Blur songs. Great lyrics. You play hard to get because you're teacher's pet, but when the boats have gone, we'll take a tumble, excuse for a fumble. Shocked me too, the things we used to do on grass. If you fancy, we can buy an ice cream cone. You know, I mean, how far away is that from just the classic rock and roll thing, you know, if you compare it to, you know, the MC5 or the Stooges or something, you know. Only Colin could sing about buying an ice cream cone. Well, you know, and Ray Davies and Chris Difford and, you know, all these people who work in that tradition. Now, this song arose out of an open E tuning which Colin found, and it was apparently borrowed from the Thunderclap Newman song Something in the Air. The chords reminded Colin of teenage days around Coatwater, which is a parkland area outside Swindon. Dave Gregory played some Fairlight pizzicato strings on this, and when it came to record the song, Todd Rundgren, who was producing the Skylarking album, apparently he said to Colin, "Don't sing so deep, you sound like a bit of a molester." So then Colin said, "I just did the David Bowie thing and sang an octave upon it." And, you know, just a wonderful song, and this became the first single from the Skylarking album.
We're only making plans for Nigel. We only want what's best for him.
And so we come to the number one song, Making Plans for Nigel, from the Drums and Wires album. I couldn't resist putting this song at number one. There are a couple of quite big Colin songs which I've left out of the list because I wanted to focus on some of the slightly more obscure, you know, deep cuts, but I couldn't do a Colin Moulding video without having Making Plans for Nigel in it, and I couldn't put this song anywhere else but at number one. You know, it's probably XTC's absolute defining moment. It was an early hit for them. It's a very spiky, angular song. It's driven by this amazing asymmetrical Terry Chambers drum rhythm, which I think was Andy Partridge's idea. It's got this wonderful snaky guitar in it from Dave Gregory, you know, really incisive playing. But I mean, what really makes this song so great is two things. Colin's vocal delivery, which is just absolutely deadpan. You know, he plays it straight, he doesn't play it for laughs. And then there's the lyric, which is just fantastic. You know, it just absolutely nails that thing in the late 1970s with the whole punk thing happening, that feeling of opportunities for young people not being what they could be, you know. But rather than doing it in the kind of John Lydon way and spitting anger and invective, Colin used irony to suggest that the opportunities for young people were perhaps not what they could be, but also he brought in that element of parental pressure, which, you know, as we've already mentioned, Colin has written about before. He says, "Nigel sprang from my subconscious for no other reason than the fact that I knew a lot of boys at school called Nigel, and they all seemed to be rather put upon. Nigel is the sort of guy who stays with his mum until his 40s and keeps pornographic magazines under the floorboards." And then he says, "I chose British Steel because I wanted something corporate." British Steel was, you know, a big industry in the 1970s in Britain. And strangely enough, 1 month after the album was released, apparently 100,000 steel workers went on strike, and the Steelworkers Union incredibly got in touch with Colin to ask him for a statement, and you know, Colin was completely flummoxed by this, and I don't think he gave him one. And back in the late 70s and early 80s, in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet, there was a very prominent politician called Nigel Lawson, who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and apparently he featured in a popular British broadsheet newspaper one morning, and there was a headline, "Making Plans for Nigel," and Colin saw that and just realised, you know, the extent to which his song had you know, permeated into British consciousness. It is a great song. I mean, I distinctly remember at school, you know, I mean, I came from a bit of an academic background, but I remember that, you know, lots of my friends who were not so academically inclined were all lined up for, you know, to go and work in this, you know, local factory, and it was very much something which was accepted. It wasn't seen as being bad, you know, and in fact, you know, we look back now in these post-industrial times when, you know, so much of British industry has vanished, you know, and those opportunities that, you know, once existed for young people to go and get a factory job are no longer there. So even though Colin's song was implicitly criticising, I suppose, the idea that, you know, young people have got nothing else to do except leave school and go and work in a factory, you know, the way things have panned out in British society, it actually gives the song an extra level of pathos or irony, and it seems to be a song which just reinvents itself, and it never gets old. It always sounds fresh. Sonically it's great as well, and yeah, I couldn't put it anywhere else except number one. It's just an absolutely classic, a classic masterpiece, really, from XTC. There we go. I hope you enjoyed that. What are your favourite Colin songs, XTC songs? I'd love to hear. So I'll see you very soon, and have a wonderful festive season. Bye.
Save us from the ball and chain.